This lecture will be focusing on immigration and urbanization. The time period that we're going to be focusing on at this point is called the Gilded Age. If you think about something that is gilded, it would be where it's made of a base material, like, say, lead or iron or even coal. But gilded means that it's been covered in gold. Gold has been wrapped around it, or maybe silver. But it's only a very thin layer on the outside, and underneath it is pretty basic, pretty dark, maybe even pretty poor. So if we look at the Gilded Age, which is the time period from 1870 to 1900, it is the rise of cities and industry and immigration, and the United States is doing very well, and we have lots of millionaires and people making a lot of money. But at the same time, underneath it, we have a rise in poor immigrants who are working for very little money, the tenements which are in bad shape, all sorts of things like that. So why the U.S.? Why does the U.S. sort of take on this mantle during this time? And that's because U.S. became a leading industrial power due to a large supply of natural resources, an explosion of inventions, and a growing city population that wanted new products. When it comes to new immigrants, our new immigrants were coming from a variety of places. The first set that we're going to talk about are those coming from Europe. Unlike our old immigrants, our immigrants from previous time, they were coming from places like Northern and Western Europe, say Germany, Ireland, places like that. But at this point, we're having Europeans who are coming from Eastern and Southern Europe, Italy, Austria-Hungary, Russia, and they're escaping religious persecution as well as economic upheaval. They're coming through Ellis Island from 1892 to 1943. Ellis Island is in New York Harbor, and it had 16 million immigrants come through its doors. This is a picture of it there. So here are some pictures. When the immigrants came through Ellis Island, they came through on steerage. And the steerage is really the least cost fare. But because of that, they were often in the worst cabins at the bottom of the ship. They didn't necessarily get a lot of food. And so we're talking about very, very poor immigrants that are coming over when they arrive. When they arrive, they would stand in long lines where they would go through and they would be asked some health questions, and if they looked sick or sounded sick, they would be taken to a doctor for evaluation. If they were found to have any medical problems, they were sent back to the country that they came from. And so immigrants would come and they would be carrying a lot of times everything that they had, right? They probably didn't have very much money, and they were coming with their basic supplies, and they were just trying to get to the United States for opportunity. We also had immigrants coming from China and Japan. They were participating in the gold rush and on the railroads, and they came through Angel Island. So Angel Island, which was on off the coast of San Francisco. Now, immigrants coming through from China and Japan, they had a much different experience. They didn't necessarily have to stand in long lines. Instead, they were kept in dormitories for days, weeks, sometimes even months at a time to be evaluated on whether or not they were well enough to come through. See, despite the fact that we did not necessarily like our Southern and Eastern Europeans, we were more comfortable with them coming in than our Asian immigrants. We also had immigrants coming from the West Indies and Mexico, from places like Jamaica, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and other islands, searching for jobs. With this rise of industry, America had the jobs. When they arrived, they faced culture shock in ethnic neighborhoods. The thing about the ethnic neighborhoods, places like Chinatown, Little Italy, Koreatown, places like that, was these were places where everyone around them spoke the same language, shopped at the same shops that had all of the same sort of food that they had back home, had the same traditions. And this is a place where they lived, they could find jobs because of people who spoke the same language and from the same country could hook them up with jobs, and it helped them in some ways retain their own culture. But at the same time, the United States very much became a melting pot. Even though the immigrants who arrived wanted to retain their own culture, their children did not necessarily, because their children became educated in our public schools. And so the children began to assimilate to or to American culture a lot faster than their parents did. They learned how to speak English in those schools, and eventually took on customs not only of Americans who were already there, but of other immigrants that they associated with, so that there was you weren't just celebrating the cultures from your country or from the United States, but rather the cultures of a bunch of different groups. Now, there were people that were really concerned about these immigrants and them not assimilating well enough and not necessarily becoming a part of the United States. And so we see a rise of nativism. Those are native-born Americans. So not Native Americans, but native-born Americans who were concerned that immigrants were coming from the wrong countries. Countries like Italy and Russia and China. And there was a fear of growing Roman Catholic and Jewish populations, the fact that they might influence our Protestant children away from their beliefs. And so you had a group called the Immigration Restriction League that was trying to pass laws prohibiting immigration. Some of the laws that started were those like the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was initially passed in 1882 and then reinstated in 1892 and 1902. It literally said that we weren't allowing any Chinese to immigrate to the United States. We also had the Gentleman's Agreement with the Japanese, where the Japanese agreed to limit immigration to the United States. They wouldn't allow people to come if they knew they were coming here to live. So we definitely were going to limit Asian immigration before that. But by the 1920s, we will start limiting immigration from all countries, especially those of Southern Eastern Europe and Mexico, as well as Asian countries. Now, urbanization is the growth of cities, both upwards and outwards. During this time, we have, with the creation of steel, we're building skyscrapers. We have all of these immigrants coming to be able to work in the factories. And so that's why the cities are growing outwards, but they're also growing upwards. Cities offered unskilled laborers steady jobs. Farm labor wasn't needed with the inventions like the steel plow and the mechanized reaper. We didn't need farm labor because people could do it on their own without the additional help. So there's no jobs on the farms, so they're going to come to the cities looking for jobs. African Americans are seeking jobs with the northern migration. They're looking to move away from sharecropping and tenant farming. And also there's just this idea of an exciting city life. But with that, we also have problems. Housing with row houses or dumbbell tenements. The picture at the bottom is of the idea of dumbbell tenements, where they are shaped somewhat like a dumbbell, where like a weight that you lift, and that area where you see the wash hanging would be the yard, where that might be where the well is and where the outhouse is, and of course where they would hang all of their wash. And within these houses, you would be cramming multiple people into one small room or apartment, sometimes multi-generational families, or for example, with the picture up there on the upper picture, which has a bunch of gentlemen who are sharing an apartment because they cannot afford their own apartment individually, so they're sharing a room, and you can see how cramped and tight it was. Transportation was an issue. They will start to solve some of these problems with things like the subway or the L, which is an elevated train, also cable cars and things like that. But how do you get all the people in? How do you get safe water in? How do you get enough water for all of the cities? Wells aren't going to be enough, so how do you port this water in? And how do you get all the trash out? And not just the trash, but all the poop. How do you get all the poop out? Because you have horses as well as people. So how do you remove all that sanitation? But the biggest enemy of the city was the fire. The tenements, though, might be built by stone. You still have problems of fires within, and how do you safely get people away? That's where fire escapes will come in. But even so, as you guys learned in 7th grade about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, fire was still going to be a major problem. There are some efforts to try to reform the city. You have the social gospel movement, this idea that you can earn salvation through service to the poor. So if you help give back to the poor, if you try to take care of them, that is how you'll earn your place in heaven. We also have community centers in slum neighborhoods called settlement houses. The support was mostly for women, by women. They would have education classes like adult education, helping them speak English, childcare opportunities so that they could go work, things like that. And Jane Addams will open the first settlement house called the Hull House, which was built in 1889 in Chicago. And that is a picture of the Hull House at the bottom there. Now, one of the benefits in the cities, but also a hindrance, was the political machines. Political machines were an organized group who controlled the activities of a political party in the city. They offered services to voters in exchange for political and financial support. So, for example, if I got you a job and then I said, I need you to vote for the Republican candidate, I would expect that you would vote for that candidate because I got you the job. The city boss was the one who controlled business licenses and inspections, also influenced the court. And there was a huge immigrant influence because they gave immigrants jobs, places to live, and support in exchange for votes. So when you arrive from Ellis Island, a political boss or maybe a city boss would meet you at the harbor, and he would speak your language, and he'd say, come with me, I'm going to take you to a place, I'm going to get you a job, I'm going to make sure you have a place to live. And he says, I'll hook you up with all of these things. So look, this is the job you'll report to tomorrow, and look, this place to live, and everyone here speaks your language, and I'm going to take care of you. And all I ask is that you vote for the candidate that I pick. And of course, you're so grateful that you will vote. So that's why this political cartoon showing in the count there is strength, and it's about the ballot. And that's the idea that, you know, if you can control the ballot, you can control things. And remember, during this time, there is no secret ballot. So everyone knows exactly who you voted for. So it's not like you could promise to vote one way but vote a different way. No, they could see how you voted. And so there was an accountability piece there. The most famous political boss of the time is a guy named Boss Tweed, or William Marcy Tweed. He was the head of Tammany Hall, which was New York City's democratic political machine. Now, Thomas Nast, who we saw a political cartoon of his during the Reconstruction era, was very critical of Tweed, and actually created a bunch of political cartoons that ridiculed him. And it brought to the attention, though immigrants might not be able to read English, they can interpret pictures. And so the political machines were brought down by the political cartoonists, and also those who were tired of getting hurt by election fraud, as well as the kickbacks from these organizations. So that is our lecture on immigration and urbanization as an introduction to the Gilded Age.